Hi, my name's Samuel Boswell. I'm a business developer at OneClick LCA, and today I'm going to be running through the ExCel import process. So I'll start off by sharing my screen. And we can see here, I'm on the project homepage of the OneClick LCA software. My project's called ExCel Import Demo. Got some general information about my building here, or my project, sorry. We've got the license, the location, and so on. And below that, I've got my calculation tool for the RICS whole life carbon assessment. And I've got one design, also called ExCel Import Demo. And so the first thing to do to begin the import process is I will click on the input data. You navigate down to the import data section, and I can select here from import ExCel. So I'll click on this, and it will then bring me to the ExCel import process page. And you can see it's really just a chronological process where we're going to be working through each of the stages, but the most important one will be the mapping stage, where we'll be mapping materials from the OneClick database to the materials that are listed on your ExCel spreadsheet. And so for this example, I'm going to be using a template file that's on the Zendesk or the customer support page. So to access that, I'll click on Help, and it brings us to here. You can see it's about the import from ExCel. And if I scroll down, I can find a template example here. So I'm going to be working on a building project in the UK, and so I'll be looking for this file. And so when I scroll down to the very bottom, I can find I've got import for building metric V111. So I'll click on this, and it will then download the example ExCel spreadsheet for me. Before I begin the import process, I'll just run through what the template file looks like, because this can help you understand what you should be formatting your ExCel spreadsheets to look like in order to optimize the import process. And so we've got a number of different fields, a number of different columns. You can see there's quite a few along here. The most important ones that you will need are the material name, of course, the quantity, and then the units. This one you will have to do at some stage. So you sort of, in my opinion, it's useful to do this from the very outset. They're just simply a drop-down menu, so you can specify what part of the building you'll be working on. These are the same categories that the building components are defined as within the OneClick software, so that's why it's quite beneficial to map them from this stage. We have the material names, quantities, and the units. These are all also essential. Every column thereafter is not essential. The thickness, of course, can be useful if you're working with meters squared and there's a thickness to your item. But all of these other ones are not necessary unless you have the information on them. And so what I'll then do is come back to the ExCel import page. I'll select that file that I just downloaded, and then I'll click continue, and we will begin the process here. And so the first one is the settings. This is where we can choose which project we're working on. So I'll stick with my ExCel import. We then choose the design. I'll choose my ExCel import again. We choose the calculation tool. So I'll go for the RICS whole life carbon assessment tool, because that's currently the only one I have with my project. We can choose what data we include. Again, I'll stick with the default, which is all data. And then we lastly have how we want to import this. So either we can replace all existing data with the imported data, we can add to it, or we can just update the quantities. If we were to be creating a new design, for example, then of course, none of this makes any difference. But for now, I'll just stick with my existing design, and I will replace all existing data. And so I will choose to check these manually. The default process is generally fine, but I think it's advisable, especially when you start doing this, to go through these, because you'll just be checking that everything's being imported correctly. And so I'll now click continue, and I will choose to overwrite my existing design. And the first stage it will take us to is classify. So classify is very simple. If you remember, in our ExCel spreadsheet, we had the classes. So if you have not used classes or categories that are matching the OneClick LCA categories, this is the stage at which you can then do that. So of course, my ExCel spreadsheet example has pretty much exactly the same material names for each of them. So they've mapped quite well. But of course, say for example, if this didn't say roof and it said something else, you can always choose the correct category you want it to go into. I'll then click continue. Filter, again, very simple. So this is just what things we do and don't want to include. So maybe we don't want to include finishes. You can uncheck that, and then it won't be included in the analysis. I'll click continue. The combine section is where we can choose extra parameters from the ExCel import that we might want to include. But also if there's any group data, we can choose as to whether we combine it into one data point or whether we keep it split into separate ones. I'll click continue. And the review section is very useful because it will tell you if there's anything that's likely to be wrong. It will highlight any potential issues that there might be with the data that's being imported. So we've got two tabs here. The model checker, this is good. We've got no issues detected. So we're okay to move on. And then below that, we have a number of options where we can essentially rerun through all of these things, but for the specific data points. So we can adjust the classes, we can add a comment. We can see that we've got the RICS category here now, and I can also adjust these manually. We've got a company classification if you apply that, and then you can see we've got the quantities there for each of them. I can also then delete any of the data points that I might not want to include in the analysis. And so with all of that, okay, I can then click continue and we'll move on to the mapping stage. So at this point, what the software is now doing is it's reading the material names here from our ExCel import, and it's automatically mapping the materials from the one-click database that it thinks are the most appropriate. So we're now on the mapping stage. We've got a filter here, which is the same as the filter that's on the building material input query from the main software. And below that, we've got a drop-down menu. And so we currently only have one drop-down menu because the identified data is saying there's 21 data points and that's 100% volume of the building. If there was a scenario in which some data couldn't be identified, by which I mean the software was not able to detect what material was in the ExCel spreadsheet, it will then tell you and it will say unidentified data, X amount and X% volume of the building. But in this case, we're doing well because we've got 100% identification. So if I click the drop down here, we can see we've got the material names column here, got the class, comment, RICS category, and so on, similar to the previous page. But then most importantly, we've now got the resource name. So the resource name is the resource from the one-click database that has been mapped to the material here. And so you can see it says gravel, and in which case it's applied a recycled gravel data point. If I click the drop down, you can see we've got a number of different options to choose from. And so these are options that the software also thinks are a good alternative to go with. Yeah, and so you can choose between one of these, or if you're not happy with any of the ones that come up, you can always scroll down to the very bottom and choose from entire database, use the filter, and search through the whole one-click database to apply the data point that you want to apply. And so the way that this works is defined by the mapping basis. So the mapping basis is how the software chooses what to map. There are a number of different options for this. This is a kind of template file, so there's not all of the different methodologies on there, but to just run through those quickly is you've got the two sort of main ones, which is your mapping or colleague mapping. And so what this means is if you've mapped a data point before and you have saved that mapping, so once you change something you can save new mapping. So in fact, if I do that here, I can click on one of these. Oh, I've got multiple rows, so I can actually apply it to multiple rows if I want to. So if I do that, I can map to selected rows, and it will also update this one here. You can see that little checkbox has appeared. And so obviously I've got two gravel data points, so that's very convenient. It saves a lot of time if you have multiple data points. And so with the Save New Mappings box selected, when I click Continue, or I can also click Save New Mappings here, the software is then going to memorize this. So next time I import an ExCel spreadsheet with a material name gravel in it, it's going to map the same material from the one-click database again. So you can almost train software to learn what sort of materials you want to work with most often. The same thing can happen with colleague mapping. So if you have a company account, you can the software can memorize all of these mappings across your whole company, which saves a lot of time again. Okay, so a couple of other mapping points is if it can't find any that you or your colleagues have mapped, it then expands the search to the United Kingdom and then global, and to see if any other users have mapped anything in that way. And then, of course, if it can't find anything that way, it will then state that it's an unidentified data point in which you can then map something yourself. And so with all of these things applied, all of the data points with the material involved, I can then click continue. And what that will then do is bring us to the results section or the results page of this design that I've just updated, and we'll be able to see all the graphs that are relevant to this. So of course, there was some data within my Excel spreadsheet that was not included. So energy consumption, construction site operations, and therefore it's not been imported. I was just working on the materials. And so that's why it's giving us this mandatory data missing section. But if I scroll below, we still get the results for the materials that I've included. So you can see we've got some results here. And if I scroll a little bit further beyond, we've got all the functionalities like most contributing materials to see where the main impact areas are, and then all the graphs for the various different visualizations. And so, yeah, that's it for the Excel import. I hope that was helpful, and get in touch if you would like to find out a little bit more. Thanks.